All right, I'd like to welcome you out. This is actually the third week DWA that we'll be doing. And you've been in high school now for 2 weeks, so I want you to write and compare basically, well, not compare, but write and argue for which you believe is better, being a sophomore or being a freshman, and use your experience, obviously, in that. Use evidence that supports that and explain your reasoning sufficiently. But today I'd like to focus on talking about the grammar focuses of the week. The first thing that we're going to talk about is essay structure, something that we're probably all pretty familiar with. Essay structure is a very important part. There's a certain expectation about how essays are built and how they're put together that your reader is looking for when they're trying to navigate an essay. And if you don't follow that structure, you can often struggle to maintain your reader's attention and fully get the impact that you want. The parts that we're going to focus on this week are the introduction as well as the conclusion. And basically, there's multiple ways that you could do this and multiple ways you could write this. But what I want to focus on today is the three functions of each of those parts. And they're very closely related and kind of mirror each other in one way or the other. So let's start with the introduction. The introduction should have something that hooks the reader in. This could be a sentence that stands alone. This could be a paragraph that stands alone for a larger piece, a more sustained piece of writing. Often it's best to do this in a manner that doesn't lose your reader. Obviously, if you don't do this well, you're not going to keep your reader a lot of times. What we've found with online reading and whatnot is that if the reader's not hooked or interested within the first paragraph, they usually just click off it and go to something else. So that's the same thing with anything that you're writing. If the reader's not hooked, they're not going to buy into it. So some ways that I've seen hooks done before, quotes can be done. Just be careful and make sure it actually applies to what you're writing about. Statistics are often helpful. Anecdotes, specific stories that help relay a point. Definitions have been used. I've also seen questions used. I would caution you against the usage of questions. They can become a little bit too leading and too specific and not general enough to where it feels like you're kind of leading your reader into the paper a little bit more than maybe you should have to. It feels a little bit forced, I guess. The next feature of your introduction should be a transition or bridge. We should take the reader from that hook into the main topic. Now, if the hook is a sufficient part of our, or if the topic is a sufficient part of our hook, then we may not have to worry about that bridge. But often, as will be the case, we may need to use that bridge in order to bring the reader over towards our topic of our paper. The next and final part of an introduction would be that of the thesis. The thesis is just a specific statement that is about the subject of the paper. It is the main point that you're trying to make, and it's the one thing that your reader should walk away from the paper knowing. It's important to understand about introductions that these things can happen as quickly as a paragraph, or they could happen over a couple paragraphs, depending upon what your time frame is that you're looking to get your message out there. Now, the conclusion is a near mirror of the introduction. When we do it, we'll just flip the order around a little bit, but basically, in the conclusion, we'd like to restate our thesis. Now, we're going to put it in other words. We're not going to reiterate exactly what we've said, but we're going to go ahead and take and use other words to capture what we wanted to get out there. We're then going to restate any key points. This is a possibility here where you can kind of bring to remembrance of the reader those points that are important for them to hold on to. And I failed to mention this earlier in the introduction part, but if it's a long enough and sufficiently long paper, you may want to mention some of your key points that you're going to make throughout there. Not necessary for most of the essays that you're going to write in my class, but if you're looking at an extended project, above 5-10 pages, you might think of that as an option that will really help navigate your reader or help your reader navigate through the work. Finally, your conclusion should reconnect your hook. Reconnect back to your hook. We should tie everything together with a pretty little bow, for lack of better terms, but we should bring the reader full circle back to where we started. That helps add a sense of fulfillment and a sense of closure to the work. Okay. The next thing that I would like to talk about are phrases. Now we're going to talk about some different phrases. Obviously, last week we talked about noun phrases, verb phrases, adverbial phrases, and adjectival phrases. We'll talk quickly about some phrases we can use in order to spice up our sentence structure and mix things up a little bit. The first type I'd like to talk about is the participial phrase. The participial phrase is a word group that consists of a present participle, which is also the ing form of a verb, or a past participle, which is the n form or the en form, plus any modifiers, objects, and complements that go with it. So that seems pretty intense, but hopefully we'll be able to break it down a little bit more easily and hopefully help you see exactly what that is. So participial phrases often function as adjectives that help describe a noun and help us kind of get a more full picture of a noun. So let's look at some examples and observations. We'll start out with the past participial phrase. This is an example here. It says, invented by an Indiana housewife in 1889, the first dishwasher was driven by a steam engine. The word here, invented, functions as a participle. Okay, it's taken from the word invent. They added the ed to make it in the past, and then they've added this whole chunk of words by an Indiana housewife in 1889 to that in order to help complete the idea. But that's a participial phrase. You'll notice that with this participial phrase coming before the main part of the sentence, the subject and the verb, that we've set it off with a comma. Okay. Anytime we set something out in front of the subject and verb of a sentence that's a whole phrase, we need to make sure that we set it off with a comma. Let's go ahead and review a couple of other examples here. Driven by a steam engine, the first dishwasher was invented by it's similar, sorry. Driven by a steam engine, the first dishwasher was invented by an Indiana housewife in 1889. Okay, so they went ahead and they've mixed it up a little bit, and we've got another participial phrase out front, driven by a steam engine. That obviously describes the dishwasher there. So once again, that's an interesting way of going at it and looking at it, but a participial phrase can be a great tool. Let's scroll down and look at this one. The Angelus building looms on the corner of its block, 7 stories, thick with dark windows, caged in a dingy mesh of fire escapes. The participial phrase there is caged. You'll notice these ed words, and this is where we've added it to the end of the sentence, and it is set off by a comma when we add it to the end of the sentence. Let's move on to the present participial phrase. A present participial phrase is the ing form, okay? As if it is happening now, or the state of being is happening now to the object. Let's go ahead and look at this one. A referee, always working before unfriendly crowds, has orders to exude poise under the most trying circumstances. So here we have working as the participle, and this phrase here, always working before unfriendly crowds, as the whole participial phrase. Okay. As we roll on, let's go ahead and look down here. Let's look at a Jack London piece. Here and there, through the smoke, creeping warily under the shadows of tottering walls, emerged occasional men and women. Okay. Now this is an interesting sentence because we've got the inversion of subject and verb here, as well as the interjection of a participial phrase. The participial phrase, the present participial phrase, is that of creeping warily under the shadows of tottering walls. And that helps give us an idea of these people, helps act as an adjective to these people. So very interesting and very good detail move to help draw your reader into an idea of what's happening in that section. It really focuses down the detail and helps paint a picture very effectively. Let's go ahead and scroll down. I think that's mostly sufficient for talking about participial phrases. Other than this, let's talk about placement and punctuation. So We find participial phrases in three positions. The initial position is before the main clause. Then the main clause is your subject, verb, and complete idea. Initial position, if we have it before the subject, verb, and main idea, we must set it off with a comma. The next position is the middle position. We can put it after the noun phrase that they modify, or we can put it in the final position, which is after the whole complete main clause. So when it becomes before a main clause, it's followed by a comma. When it follows the main clause, a comma must come before the participial phrase. And then when it occurs in the middle of the sentence, we use two commas. We set it off from the noun that it's modifying all the way to the continuation and finishing of the sentence. Let's go ahead and talk quickly about prepositional phrases. Prepositional phrases is a word group consisting of a preposition, the object that belongs to it, and all modifiers belonging to that object. So a prepositional phrase can function as an adjectival or adverbial phrase, and they tell us the position of something relative to another noun. So for example, I will not obey the voices in my head. So saith Bart Simpson. Okay, in my head is the prepositional phrase. Okay, this prepositional phrase provides us with a perception of placement in relation to the voices in the head that are there for Bart. Okay. If we look at this next example, above the trees and rooftops, the dingy glare of the London sky faded upwards into weak violet heights. Okay. Above the trees and rooftops is an example of a prepositional phrase. I would recommend in this case that you throw a comma there between that and the main clause of the sentence, but they've chosen not to, and they're a published author, so I'm not going to argue with them, but I would just say I would recommend that you do that as a student. Also, we have into weak violet heights. Okay, once again showing us positioning of things there. There's not a lot to say about prepositional phrases other than you can use those to effectively move your writing along and get a better description of where things go. They are often used in higher writing because you can cram a lot of information into a sentence by giving it relationship to other objects. So you're welcome to review these. These are on the assignment sheet, but in interest of time, I'm going to scroll down to the absolute phrase. Okay? The absolute phrase is a group of words that modifies an independent clause as a whole. Okay? An absolute is made up of the noun and the modifiers, which often include a participle or participial phrase. An absolute can precede, follow, or interrupt the main clause. Once again, in our rules with commas, apply the same. We would either set it off with a comma if it's before, between it and the main clause. If it comes in the middle, we'll set it off with two commas. If it comes after, we'll set it off with a comma. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this. Their slender bodies, sleek and black against the orange sky, the storks circled high above us. Kind of a really good job of blowing up a moment. Absolute phrases do an incredible job of just thrusting us into the moment and giving us detail, helping make us focus on what we're looking at. The next one is the storks circled high above us, their slender bodies sleek and black against the orange sky. Okay? And here we see the participial phrase featured after the whole clause. But you can see there's a whole lot more detail offered by that absolute phrase. Let's go ahead, and this one doesn't have a participial phrase. This first one had a past participial phrase. You can see the word circled. Let's look at this bottom one. The storks, their slender bodies sleek and black against the orange sky, circled high above us. And you can see here they've chosen to set this off with commas after the noun that it modifies, and that helps give us kind of a good flow to that. All right, so that is absolute, participial, prepositional phrases, introductions, and conclusions. Now I'd like you to go ahead and try to apply at least one sentence with all of these featured, at least one sentence for each of these features in your DWA. Best of luck, and we'll see you in class.